Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you had a nice lunch today. With our recharge energy, let us continue to the third session of the day, which will discuss election year 2024 as a new dawn in EU-Indonesia relations. To moderate this discussion, I warmly invite Mr. Andrew Mantong, researcher at the Department of International Relations of CSIS Indonesia, to begin moderating. Mr. Andrew, the time and floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhan, for the introduction. Welcome again to our KAS-CSIS Germany-Indonesia Strategic Dialogue. This is session 3, and I will be the moderator for this session. My name is Andrew. I'm a researcher of international relations from CSIS Indonesia. And this session, we will focus mainly on the election that has been held both in Indonesia and in Europe. Just to begin, there have been some talks here, at least in Indonesia, and some concerns with the rise of the new president in Indonesia, especially from the EU side, from various discussion and various seminars that we have been through since last year, because apparently here in this building, there was a talk from the President Prabowo when he was still the presidential candidate with a very strong criticism towards the European Union. And that created the concerns. While Indonesian media also sometimes prior to EU election, we've been also discussing about the possible rise of right-wing political forces in Europe and how it manifests in the direction of EU policy. And to discuss about this theme deeper, we are honored to have 4 speakers with us. The first speaker is Mr. Antoine Ripoli. He's the Minister Consular of Parliamentary Affairs, EU Delegation to ASEAN. And the second speaker is Dr. Denis Warsana, the Director of KAS for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. The third speaker would be Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director of CSIS Indonesia. And the last speaker is Mr. Cornelius Purba. He is the Senior Editor of the Jakarta Post. Without further ado, in the interest of time, I would like to invite Mr. Antoine Ripol to give your presentation. And, in the interest of time, it would be nice to have no more than 10 minutes presentations, 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, everybody. It's always difficult to have the session after lunch, so we'll try to not to be too boring. So I always say I am European and French in this order. I work at the EU delegation, working on parliamentary affairs, and I'm being seconded from the EU Parliament. So when I read about the year of elections and challenges, opportunities for democracy beyond 24, I feel very much home, having worked at the Parliament for the last 34 years. As you just said, we had elections in Indonesia and in Europe this year. By the way, we had elections, I think half of the population of the world went through elections this year. I think that in many countries, this year has been a year of many changes. We saw a lot of political changes in Japan, in America, in the UK. We'll see what happens in Germany in February. But certainly many changes, and I believe it's hard to already to know and to imagine what the impact of all these changes in the world in different places will have. But I think we have to brace for changes. In terms of Indonesia and Europe, there were changes, but I think there's more permanence and continuity than changes. Apparently, at least on the paper, I think it looks like the new president of Indonesia looks like will very much be a presidency of continuity with President Jokowi. And we are expecting that. Well, of course, there will be different accents, different personalities expressed. We'll see how things go. And then, of course, every presidency or every new government wants to do things, and then things happen in the world, and then they have to react. And it's always difficult to anticipate what may happen in the next years, especially now with all the changes I just mentioned. In terms of the EU, we had elections in June, as every 5 years, as you just mentioned, and there was a lot of speculations before the elections on the fact that the extreme right, or the right actually on both sides of the political spectrum, would be very spectacular. Well, actually what we have seen is certainly a rise of the extremes, and we have more political parties in the EU Parliament that are on the extreme parts of the hemicycle than before. And by the way, I don't know if you have an idea, but we have at the European Parliament more than 200 political parties represented. So it's not surprising that you may have some kind of also extremism expressed. But what happened in the end is that the majority of the pro-EU integration majority, made of the mainstream parties, center-left, center-right, liberals and Greens, kept their majority at more or less 60%. So, okay, we had a very contested vote last Thursday at the Parliament on deforestation, a topic that is well known here. And as you know, the Parliament decided based on the proposal of the Commission to postpone by 1 year the implementation of the deforestation, the UDR, in order to enable companies, especially small farmers, to adapt to the legislation. And at that, I'm saying that because at that vote, we saw that there was a majority not made of center mainstream parties, but of center right and extreme right. So we have to watch carefully what's going to happen in the next 5 years. But let's say that normally what we can expect is stability. I always say, you know, this morning the gentleman, the professor, was mentioning the fact that the EU sometimes is not coordinated enough. But I always remind people that the EU is not a country. The EU is a unusual political animal, actually unique political animal. It's a supranational organization that makes laws, takes laws, but it's not one country. So, and as I said, 200 political parties represented make things maybe a bit more complex. The second thing is that the EU is based on law. So the EU cannot do anything that is not based on law, based in our treaties, the latest iteration being the Lisbon Treaty. So what you see in the EU is what you get. The EU cannot do anything wild because the EU has, by law, by constitution, to respect the treaties and the norms. So usually there is a continuity in the EU process, but that said, the EU is a democratic system, both by the election of these members of the European Parliament every 5 years, but also by the election in each member state in each of our 27 member states. To have a law, you need to have an agreement between MEPs representing the people and member states, which are represented by governments elected directly by their people. So it's a very democratic system. So as much as we can expect continuity, you never know because it depends on democracy. So you never know what. To go to the topic of today, the EU-Indonesia relationship in the years ahead, as far as we can predict. So Indonesia is the third largest democracy, and it's expected to become one of the world's biggest economies by 2045, 2050, offering significant market potential and opportunities for investment and trade. It's a key player for regional security and securing trade routes, and a pillar of stability amid rising tensions in the South China Sea. Indonesia plays a crucial role in upholding the centrality and integration of ASEAN, and in solving regional crises, or trying to solve regional crises with the support to multilateral fora, a continuous commitment to concrete cooperation with the UN, its agencies and other thematic organizations. Indonesia has integrated the FATF is candidate to the OECD, and the EU supports that candidacy, and is also trying to be member of the BRICS. As one of the world's most biodiverse nations and a thriving economy, Indonesia plays a critical role in addressing the environmental crisis of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. The inauguration of President Prabowo last month, we see that as a chance for a renewed political engagement and a momentous opportunity for an upgrade of our relations. Indonesia is increasingly willing to project a bigger role on the global stage, and I think that we all have to realize that, and I think that Europeans realize that, Indonesia is a big country, must be respected as such. And we feel, I mean, I sense that here, and with all my colleagues of the EU delegation, we really sense by living in Indonesia this need and this, we respect that feeling that you should be respected. And I saw yesterday that candidate Anies mentioned the fact that the visit of President Prabowo in South America and in America, he gave a feeling of pride, and he represented the country well. I think this is something that sometimes maybe in Europe we don't see enough, and this is something, the message that we convey at the EU delegation to our headquarters, take into account that aspect, show to Indonesia, not only by words but also by actions, your commitment to the region. I would like to emphasize, and you won't be surprised, two aspects in the relationship. One is on environmental issues and EU's normative power, and the other one is on trade. On environmental issues and EU normative power, I would say that the EU has paid close attention to Indonesia's concerns about the impact of the EU's normative power on Indonesian smallholders. This is evidenced by the joint task force that allows the EU, Malaysia and Indonesia to discuss how to best implement the EUDR. This is also evidenced by the proposal of the Commission I just mentioned that was voted last week by the Parliament to postpone by 1 year the implementation of EUDR in order for small companies, small agricultures to prepare for due diligence processes. At the end of the day, this regulation, and more generally all the EU's normative power, is about making the international trade framework clearer as well as more sustainable. In a world where many are tempted to use arbitrary tariffs, monetary incentives to attract more local production, the EU is still the world's largest open market, where Indonesia registers yearly trade surpluses in the order of 11 billion USD. To make trade flows more sustainable can be a joint effort for which Indonesia, as a leading producer of commodities, can play a crucial role in defining due diligence procedures. If needed, those countries that take an active part in this effort, such as Vietnam and Malaysia, often increase their market share in the EU. We are sure that Indonesia is well equipped to ensure that trade flows will continue uninterrupted. On the second aspect, which is trade, the EU is committed to achieve the CEPA with Indonesia that creates added value by opening up meaningful opportunities for both sides. We welcome the very good progress made in the CEPA talks so far, with several chapters concluded and close to conclusion. We commend the renewed momentum by the Indonesian administration to bring this closer to the finishing line. The EU believes in a balanced and mutually beneficial CEPA that addresses the key economic interests of both parties by, one, unlocking additional market access for Indonesia to the EU, including for key products of export interest, providing space to respect Indonesia's key policy objectives, such as on downstreaming, and strengthening dialogue and cooperation to support Indonesian stakeholders to seize these opportunities. And secondly, providing for a more favorable, stable and predictable legal environment for EU economic operators and investors to do business in this country. This requires sound discipline that address key existing restrictions on exports from and imports to Indonesia, so to avoid supply chain disruptions in our bilateral trade. In other words, tariff liberalization becomes meaningless if other requirements block access to the market. The EU has deployed a tremendous amount of flexibility in this negotiation so far, showing readiness to explore tailor-made solutions and factor in many Indonesian requests, including in order to allow Indonesia to retain policy space, for instance, through future work programs, transition periods, and carve-outs. However, we cannot come to the conclusion of a free trade agreement without the guarantee that liberalized goods can be traded freely, without significant export or import restriction, or that investors do not face prohibitive regulatory constraints. This simply would not work for us. Let me remind you that the trade with EU is complementary to Indonesia's domestic production. We are not in competition for most of our production. On investment, EU operators are sought after in Indonesia for the high quality and reliability of their investment. The EU does not seek to change through CEPA the Indonesian regulatory environment across the board, but there is no reason why Indonesia's restrictions should be maintained for EU products and investment on a bilateral basis. I'm good, I'm coughing because I think I came to the end of my time, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much especially for mentioning some specific issues like related to trade, deforestation issues, and future concerns about our FTA. Second speaker is Mr. Dennis Suwarsana, the Director of KAS for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Mr. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mas Andrew. Am I too loud? I'm too close. It's better? Okay, sorry. So, well, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Antoine, for giving the opening remarks, basically. And I would very much like to react to what you said, but I'm sticking to my text, and maybe I will have the occasional remark on what you said. So, well, first of all, of course, I do agree with what Antoine said. I think that the EU and Indonesia can only profit from a closer relationship, especially right now with all the global developments going on, because both want to diversify, especially with regard to China. They want to have more partners, especially economically, to reduce their dependencies on China. And they are both attractive to each other. Especially also the EU is attractive to Indonesia. It still has a huge market with high purchasing power. It has world-leading industrial companies that can contribute to industrial development here in Indonesia. So, and at the same time, while we're talking about diversifying away from China for both regions and the different countries involved, now with the election of Donald Trump, the US has added a new dimension of uncertainty, and the election of Trump will probably lead to more protectionist policies around the world, harming both Indonesia. I mean, we've heard about the expectation that the US administration under Trump will probably also go after countries that help China to divert trade and to try to go around the tariffs. But it will also, of course, harm the EU, which is basing its business model on open trade. And as the EU is the most important trading partner for Europe, and China is the number 2, and I think in Indonesia it's the opposite. China's number one, US is number two. So this will have profound implications for Europe and also for Indonesia. And especially if we look to the EU, I mean, the EU is in stagnation. Some of the countries are in recession. Germany is in the second year of recession. The trade with China has slowed down, has diminished. And actually, the trade with China has been one of the main sources of growth in the past years and decades even, especially for the German economy. And with the US becoming more protectionist, Europe just needs new partners to create growth for its export-based economy. And that's where many countries, of course, get into the frame, but especially Indonesia, as one of the G20, one of the biggest economies in the world, relatively high growth rates, becomes, at least with regard to the need to get more closer and more and new partners, it becomes very attractive for Europe. So do the election results point to a new dawn for EU-Indonesia relations? I would say that there is a good chance that the elections here in Indonesia, but also the EU elections, but also the upcoming elections in Germany provide an opportunity to improve the relations between Europe and Indonesia. I want to start with the German elections. They have not yet taken place, but some of you might have heard that the German government has collapsed a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to have early elections in February. And although, of course, I don't know who will win, I'm quite confident that my party will win, so the Conservative Party will win the election. And no, but with regard also to the political discussion that we're having in Germany, I think the approach of a value-based foreign policy that has been very much pushed by the Green Foreign Minister will become less of a focus in the new government, whoever will, be in government, and a more pragmatic foreign policy and more pragmatic also development cooperation, economic cooperation that focuses on economic interests will come into play. And the same, I think, could be the case with regard to the new EU Commission. Because also in Europe, we just heard it, the mood is becoming increasingly pragmatic, not just with regard to foreign policy, but also with regard to foreign policy. There's a conservative right-wing majority in the European Parliament, we just heard that, and economic growth is one of the main political focus right now in all of Europe, so not just on the European level, but also in all of the member states. And therefore, I think there's a real possibility that the EU foreign and development policy might become much more pragmatic and more focused on our own economic interests. And there are first signs of this. I mean, Antoine just mentioned the deforestation regulation that has been postponed only for 1 year, but it's still 1 year where things can happen. So maybe it's going to be postponed further. And also there's a new commissioner for international partnerships coming up. So that's also, I think, a strong signal that this has become top of the agenda for the European Union. And if we look to the elections in Indonesia, of course, President Prabowo seems like the anti-EU president. I mean, we've all heard his speech here at CSIS last year. But I think that much of his rhetoric stems from the frustration Indonesia's political elite feels with regard to the EU. The trade negotiations, of course, is one source of the frustration, but also the deforestation regulation, the nickel ban, and the EU going to the WTO about it, then the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So there are many topics that somehow frustrated the Indonesian side. And I think that when and if the EU becomes more pragmatic, also with regard to these policies Prabowo and his foreign policy establishment could become much more welcoming and pragmatic as well. So I think there is a chance with what we are seeing right now in Brussels, in the member states, in Indonesia, that it might get better instead of worse, especially given the global environment. And with regard to the German role, I mean, this is the German-Indonesian strategic dialogue. I think what we see right now happening in both Germany with regards to the upcoming election as well as in Indonesia after the election is that there's a strong, well, let's say there's a window of opportunity for Germany and Indonesia to lead these Europe-Indonesia relationships, because you've seen today Vice Minister Hafas giving his opening speech. He still is basically the ambassador to Germany. He is a strong links to Germany, and he will be responsible for economic partnerships in the foreign ministry, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's a huge asset for the German government. It's a huge asset for the European Union to have someone like him being in charge of this portfolio. Then if you look at the foreign policy team of Indonesia, I mean, to say that with the team captain, of course, President Prabowo, he himself speaks German. He's very fond of Germany. He's a big fan of German watches, but also a big fan of Germany. So that's a plus. Foreign Minister Sugiono studied in Germany, and there are a lot of people, you know, in President Prabowo's generation who have fond memories about Germany, have strong links to Germany due to their own time in Germany, for instance, as students. So I think this really provides an opportunity for us as Germans, I mean, for the Team Germany, for the German foreign policy establishment, to take up a special role with regard to to Europe's relation with Indonesia. We could somehow be and this something to say for a German, but the friendly face of the European Union here in Indonesia, because we all know that personal relationships matter a lot here in this in Indonesia, not just in Indonesia, in the whole region. I think for Germans, at least that's what I feel right now in Indonesia, the doors are very wide open. So we should go through it and be somehow the bellwether of EU-Indonesian relationship for the next years. And just to maybe very briefly at the end comment on what you said. Of course, you're a representative of the European Union, of the European Parliament, but of course, Europe is not just the EU. It's 27 member states plus all of the European countries who are not part of the EU. And so foreign policy is basically or mostly done by the national governments. So I think, yes, I mean, Terence mentioned it, there's a lack of coordination with regard to different foreign policy portfolios in the EU. But I think we should not just wait for the EU to coordinate everything, but there's an opportunity now, especially as I said, for the German government, and there's I think that it should also be the member states among themselves who coordinate their own foreign policy, their own diplomatic engagement with the region, with Indonesia, and just to strengthen the European, and I say European-Indonesian relationship, not just EU. So there's a clear responsibility for the member states, I would say, and there's, with regard to the special role of the German-Indonesian relationship also, I think, great opportunity that the member states led by Germany can play a huge part in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dennis, for highlighting both challenges and opportunities, especially since you mentioned about the sources of pragmatism and windows of opportunity that are currently at hand when it comes to Indonesia and German relations, with the possibility to move forward with Indonesia-EU agenda. The third speaker is Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, our Executive Director of CSIS. Pak Yose, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Well, Dennis complained about my opening remarks this morning, because I took all the point that also he already made. And it turns out this session, he also already took the point that I like to deliver. But anyway, so. But I think I agree with Dennis on the how we could also elevate the EU-Indonesia's relations, especially trying to promote through the good relations of Indonesia and Germany, for example, or with other European countries as well. So in that kind of regard, I think we also need to look at how Indonesia and EU have shaped the relations so far, especially in the, and on economic relations. So now I'd like to look at these economic relations, and how it has been shaped so far, and how we can also take another step to elevate and improve the relations between those two economies. I have 3 points actually on the Indonesia-EU economic relation here. And I might say first that Indonesia and European Union's economic relation is very dynamic. Unfortunately, it's not really in a positive way. It's dynamic because it's fluctuates a lot, and there has a lot of nuance in the economic relations between the two economies. On trade, for example, Indonesia, unfortunately, is losing its share in the EU trade. In the pre-pandemic era, the Indonesia export consists of around 7.7. Indonesia's export to the EU consists of around 7.8% of Indonesia's total export. But right now, after the pandemic, the last 2 years, it is only around 6.2%. So it has a big drop actually, not really in the amount itself, in the absolute terms, but rather in the importance and the share of the trade. If you look at from the point of view of Europe, you can also see that Indonesia's Indonesia's share has been declining quite significantly actually to Europe, so to the EU. So there is a shift to other countries, for example, because Indonesia's export now shifting to other countries, or the European import that used to come from Indonesia might now shift from other countries as well. One of the reasons is actually because of the EU sustainability-driven policies, such as the restriction on palm oil, for example, under the RED2, as well as several other policies, as well as on the business strategy of at the company level. It has created trade tensions and accusations of protectionism among that. That's why also we heard from Dennis that there is a feeling of frustrations among Indonesia's officials that it becomes even stronger in recent years, especially after the pandemic. And it might also be getting stronger in the new administrations. On the investment side, also the EU's insistence on strict environment and labor standards has also faced resistance from Indonesian stakeholders prioritizing the industrial growth. That's why, for example, when we're talking about hilirisasi, downstreaming strategy in our nickel and other mineral industry, we never heard the involvement of European companies here, European business here. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that also resulted to the frustrations among Indonesian stakeholders, especially on the business stakeholder. And this economic relation is also affected by disputes between Indonesia and EU, like for example, the anti-dumping measures on Indonesia stainless steel, and also the on the palm oil, as well as on a nickel ban, and those disputes have been taken to the WTO. That might be a good way to solve the dispute, but to take it to the WTO, but in the end, it creates more tensions, higher tensions on the economic relations between the two economies. So against these higher tensions might not be declining in the future, but it has potentials to go even to have greater tensions in the future with all of these developments, the current developments and policy. My second point is on EU's trade and industrial policy, especially those regulatory policies such as CBAM, deforestation regulations, and many other policies from the European Union. It risks alienating trade partners in developing countries, including also Indonesia. While these policies aim to reduce carbon emission and deforestation, for example, they have potential to disproportionately impact exporters reliant on resource-based industries and creating frictions in trade relations. And we cannot neglect that kind of impact, actually. Although we also see the benefit of having those policy and those regulations, but I think the message that you need to that the EU need to send is that we really need to embrace that kind of policy, and developing countries are not alone. Just and will get more assistance in order to apply and to increase compliance to those policy, because currently the narrative is still not clear. Basically, the implication of trade on those from those policies is quite obvious. Trade would be reduced, and there would be anti-competitiveness effect on trade because of those policies. But the result on climate action itself, the result on environmental itself, is not really clear. We might have the situations when the trade impact is negative, while the climate impact is negligible. The support for climate action is negligible. So we can that would create counterproductive response from developing countries, and it already does. Last month I attended the WTO conference on trade and environment, and then it seems that this kind of negative response, counterproductive response from the from the developing countries already is quite massive actually, and that might not be good things for climate actions in the future. So I would like to conclude my talk with my third point is on the Indonesia-EU CEPA. I think we still also need to look at the Indonesia-EU CEPA. It is obvious that it would be beneficial for both economies, as Antoine also already mentions. For Indonesia, it is good for Indonesia because a lot of things that we can get from the negotiation and from the agreements. For Europe, it will also support diversification strategy and also would support a de-risking strategy. I believe Europe cannot only just depend on Vietnam, because currently in Southeast Asia, only Vietnam is the partners that have FTA. Because Vietnam's economy itself already saturated and have limited capacity. It has to be diverse. Now, when you're talking about diversification, it's not only diversification from China, but also diversification from Vietnam, I think. So in the end, we have to find the root of the problems in these negotiations. I think the contentious problems might be dealt with a good alternative. We also need to have a better approach on dealing with some issues. Perhaps I think he also mentions that Europe is based on law, yeah, and this kind of it is also brought to the negotiation table, because when I had a chance to visit the DG Trade last February or last March with Professor Gomez as well, the DG Trade has this the menu of trade negotiations, and every partner need to comply with this menu, and you cannot really easily change the menu. So it is take it or leave it attitude. That kind of attitude, I think, that one of the issue that makes Indonesia also has some difficulties. Of course, from Indonesian side, we also have a lot of problems, but I believe we also need to find some attitude that try to bridge the relations or try to bridge the interest between those two economies. I think I conclude my talk here. I already take a lot of too much time. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you, Pak Yose. Round of applause for Pak Yose. Thank you for mentioning some specific challenges that has arisen from Indonesia-EU trade relations, as well as some of the tensions with regards to sustainability agenda, climate change agenda, and trade agenda. We have mainly discussing about economic ties. No one has touched about political and security issues, but mainly because it's the dominant narrative in the EU-Indonesia relations. Last but not least, we would like to invite Mr. Cornelius Purba, the senior editor of the Jakarta Post, to give your presentation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, especially those who subscribe to Jakarta Post, both online and print. It's for my very personal interest. Will pay my salary. Those for you who have not paid yet, please repent and subscribe soon. This is not easy to talk in siesta time. I'm called senior journalist. Actually, nothing to do with the qualities, just because of my age. And journalists, actually, my writing is provocative, but content is very shallow. And forgive me if I provoke you for no reasons. Talking about Europe always linked to colonialism. Until now, I wrote several articles about EU. You can check Google, maybe some quotes here. I could not understand with the relation with Indonesia and the Netherlands. Indonesia, the driver sit on the right side. In Netherlands, the right, the left side. The Netherlands occupied us for 350 years, believe. They even did not want to teach us how to drive correctly. That's a mentality. I think I have some. I have here because, sorry I'm provocative. Is ASEAN more important for you, for EU, or than EU for ASEAN? Your mindset is still 15 years ago. You can preach. There's tradition of you. I'm sorry, I'm provoking. You preach about human rights. You ask about the supremacy of the law. And now you ask, why don't you preach to China? Do you have the gut? No. We also don't have the gut, but normally we're very developing. Now look here, for ordinary people. I quoted from Fox News. Churches across Europe repurposed for nightclubs and hotels as a tendency shrinks to stunning low. If you talk to Indonesians, the Christian, I'm Catholic, we feel very sad. If you go to Netherlands, of the European churches, very, very few people go to church. The youngest is at my age. And very different from the US. And we are Catholic Christian, very sad with the fact. And our Muslim brothers and sisters are very happy. Look, it's nothing to do with Islam or religion, right? Look, church now becomes mosque. So at the dinner level, people say, Europe, you talk about moral, but you don't go to church. And then EU, for us, for a long time, you are the preacher. Preach about everything. And you don't listen to us. You say supremacy of the law. EU, the preacher, and ASEAN. We cannot separate Indonesia from ASEAN. Indonesia is the largest and the most important member of ASEAN. There is always temptation from Indonesia, like to follow UK. You are too big for European Union. Just exit. Indonesia, sometimes the elites, you are too big for ASEAN. Why don't you exit? The burden for Myanmar, for Cambodia. EU, I read, often uses sophisticated words like multilateralism, science, to justify its political and military presence in the Asia-Pacific region with a single mission to contain China and regain control of the rich territory. If any you ever say to Xi Jinping, let's fight. Out of the southern European countries, my European friends start to stare at me, so I a bit hesitate. You come suddenly come to Indo-Pacific. What business do you have in the Indo-Pacific? France, Germany, suddenly in love with Indo-Pacific. We agree with ASEAN, a concept of FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific. You're Europe, Atlantic, you're closer to Atlantic than the Indian Ocean. For us, your purpose is you cannot fight against China alone. You want to bang. I'm very sorry again, don't get mad with me. The European countries like the illusion that they could unilaterally impose their own will. If you want to give us a loan, I want to this, labor, blah, 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 blah. And now we can go easily to China. China close their eyes, give you money. We can talk later about regulation, about agreement. That's what happened in Jakarta-Bandung speedy train. If you give us 100 million euro, we have ordered 100 pages. Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. China say, it's up to you to use the money as long as you pay with high interest. You talk about the value of human rights, good governance, and equality. Indonesia and EU have held more than 10 negotiations under Indonesian-EU Comprehensive Partnership Agreement since 2016. before Jokowi leaves the office, he hopes September he already concluded. And European Union say, in Islamic term, inshallah next year. Once you say, inshallah, Indonesia, no one trusts you, you will deliver your promise. I'm sorry for my Muslim friends. I don't want to. Now, you has no choice but to accept a more powerful Indonesia and ASEAN. I don't think you're ready for that. You still want us to follow your value. I don't believe, I wrote this, you can Google some quotes from my previous articles. I don't believe forest protection and your love to environment is all in EU's mind in palm oil and nickel production. Very beautiful you say to us, the sake of the environment, the labor, actually it is business. You want to control our economy. We also try to control the economy. We had 2 weeks so far. But now we have very good friend China. Everyone goes to China. EU goes to China, US goes to China. Donald Trump say anything, he will punish Xi Jinping, but he will find himself, actually he's punished, not Xi Jinping. And the European Commission plans to phase out palm oil in biofuels in 2030. But you remember during when Vladimir Putin occupied Ukraine, there is no sunflower oil. And secretly, some countries come to Indonesia. Could you send us more palm oil, but fish the very high quality and check the labor, check environment? Bullshit. And during the war, it's so-called in Europe, Russia cannot provide the gas. And secretly, you want to import coal from Indonesia. Very, very dirty coal you import. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I forgive you if you're angry with me. Again, EU has no choice except a more powerful Indonesia and ASEAN. Now, EU-ASEAN Leader Summit, ASEM, in December 2022. For Indonesia, ASEAN, the ASEM almost means nothing. First, this is informal. First, very informal. We have so many choices. One member of G20, Indonesia member of G20. You like it or not? You say wrong or wrong, you're a member of G20. ASEM, what we can say informal? Praise each other, and you tell us, do more for environment. We don't need the preach. China is so big now, China. Once you want to punish us, we go to China, and China say, here, my friend, here, my friend. Last year, 2022, celebration of 45th anniversary of relation between the two regional trade blocs. Remember, the total GDP of ASEAN reached $3 trillion in 2022. Correct me if I'm wrong. Positioning is the 5th largest economy in the world. 20 years ago, we have to go to Europe, go to London, go to Brussels. Please help us, please, please. And now we say, if we don't like it, okay. And European Union say, no, we are friends. But you know, our law is very strong, our democracy. Indonesia is the 3rd largest democracy in the world after India and US. Of course, so many shortcomings. But right wings now emerging in Europe. I heard the term of reference, right wings, actually not so powerful, but actually it's dangerous. Like in France, in Netherlands, here we also right wings growing. I think under Prabowo, moving to the right side. I hope no one from Prabowo is here. So, could you go ahead? Terus. Okay. the European Union is the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP after US. You number 2, you're number 5. Not so big difference, right? So be more cautious to talk to us. Be more cautious. Ya, silakan Mas. Terus ke bawah. So again, about Europe, as my colleagues say, Europe not just about European Union. 20 years ago, ASEAN is very willing to adopt European Union system. Most perfect, is ideal. And European countries, European media, American media, all negative very about ASEAN. Non-binding, non-interference, blah, 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 blah. But you look, now many complaints, I'm not expert on the EU. Small countries say, we are colonized by the big powers like Germany, France. We must follow you, like smallest countries, Portugal. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Maybe you're angry with me with my observation. I mean, ASEAN, because we loose, that's why we are so strong. Non-interference. Indonesia is very willing. Now Indonesia becomes the human rights preacher to ASEAN, like to Myanmar. Because we are loose, we can grow together. I think that's what Gomez, difference with Indonesia and India. India acting like big brother in South Asia. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, this is Indonesian perspective. Indonesia tried to avoid that trend. We don't ketuk-ketuk kepala, not the head. We try to grow together. It's not easy, the temptation for big countries. But now we realize we take ASEAN way. I'm sorry, I'm not working for foreign ministry. I'm not the spokesman. I did not vote Prabowo. But now, you see, European Union, you must learn also from us, from our wisdom. We share together our wisdom. We share together our trade. Palm oil is very bad for environment, yes. But I don't believe because your love for environment, the only reason for to pressure Indonesian palm oil. Also nickel. Nickel also very damaging to environment. You should stop importing nickel. It's very damaging. Now back, I'm too long, I think. I hope I still can save leaving the room after talking like this. President Prabowo, the former army generals feels comfortable talking to with European leaders because our European leaders can no longer be fussy about human rights violations. If Prabowo was president 15 years ago, EU will come here. Prabowo go blah 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 blah. He was listed in the years, right? And now red carpet the White House because of economy, because politics, not because the Bible say you must punish those who kill other people. Prabowo is more Western-minded than his predecessors. The third president of Indonesia and the late B.J. Habibie. Former President B.J. Habibie, sometimes we say he's more German citizen than Indonesian citizens. Because his breakfast, lunch, and dinner, German menu. His ice cream also from German. So he is the president of Indonesia, president of Germany, or both president of Indonesia and German. That's B.J. Habibie. Indonesia is moving to the right now. I've been told that too long, but different from the previous general perception, which is often linked to Islamist Indonesia. Now there is more similarities with the right-wing movement in Indonesia. Right movement in Europe, I think similar to what happens in Indonesia. Indonesia military is traditionally rather hostile to China, but they realize they have little choice but to close to China. Prabowo will have more strategic security and defense interest in the EU than his predecessor, Jokowi. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this very shallow observation.
Thank you very much, Bang Cornel, for such a frank assessment on Indonesia-EU relations. I Before proceeding with question and answer from the audience, probably for the other speaker, do you have any comments to, this Indonesian speaker has highlighted some of the challenges. I noticed there have been some optimism and some assurance that there would be some continuity in EU policy. So this is why we have a dialogue. Probably from you, there would be some response.
Well, I would like to thank Pak Cornelius because it's always, as I said at the beginning, it's always difficult after lunch to get the attention. He certainly managed to get our attention. He's a journalist, and it's my fault because I praised him before the panel, saying I read the Jakarta Post every morning on the MRT, and I praised the independence. So it showed how independent the Jakarta Post can be. Certainly, I think I would. And you would not be surprised, and you wouldn't be surprised, Pak Cornelius. I may disagree with you on certain things. To begin with, I know it's fashionable to say that European preaches, but I don't believe Europe preaches. Europe is doing, is trying to get the highest standards for its people and beyond. Why? Because our people are asking for things. Our people are asking, I think rightly, for good governance, or as good as possible, less corruption, more good governance. People want administration to function well and to get results for their taxpayers' money. So that's why we apply to ourselves, to our member states, trying to have the best governance possible. And we are not perfect, but nobody is, but we try. We all agree that, and we now having the COP29, we all agreed as an international community that climate change is a priority. We can certainly, every government can always kick the can, and the easy thing to do when you're a politician is to kick the can, to say, oh, it will be done later because today I have something else to do. That does not mean that everybody is in the same position to do the same effort at the same time. We all agree with that. But certainly some actions must be taken. And the other day I was gathering a group of young Indonesians, the youth, Indonesian youth diplomats, and they were telling me that they see the EU as, not the EU, but what we are legislating about on climate change as the example of what we should all do, because it's not just telling you what you should do. We all committed to that as a international community. So climate change is something that we all need to do something about and stop kicking the can. Human rights, all these standards, these are things, if you talk to an Indonesian in the street outside of this building, and you will ask him whether he wants to have better governance, well, President Prabowo said he wants to eradicate or to limit corruption. Well, we have the same objectives. Climate change, he said the same. And, we talk about CBAM and we talk about the deforestation, but we have many issues of, develop capacity of cooperation with Indonesia. So we're not preaching new. We are just trying ourselves to do what we believe what we know our citizens want and we know your citizens want. Of course, our economies are not at the same level. We can't pretend to do the same, but we don't. When you tell us you have an issue with the deforestation, we got together to talk about what are the issues, how can we implement it. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying it's easy to say, oh, these Europeans are preaching and they're not doing. Every year we at the European Parliament, our members have a report on human rights in Europe. So we are denouncing in our own countries what is wrong. So we're not just telling what we think may be wrong or bad in Indonesia or in Malaysia or anywhere in the world. We do the same to ourselves. The reason why we have a growth that is not the growth that we would like to have is also because we impose these standards on our companies, so on our people, who in the end is footing the bill, is the people who pay their energy bill, go to the supermarket. We are, as Europeans, we are not just preaching, we are doing, and at the detriment of our competitiveness. This is why now at the elections we had many people who see inflation is a huge problem, and it is a huge problem here and there. And so now I think we're going to recalibrate I don't see, no, we're going to find a balance, a better balance probably between the green ambitions that are necessary and industrialization, decarbonation. We need to find a balance because we need to be competitive. But we should not kick the can on environment. So I'm just saying, I like your, your free spirit. I'm a diplomat, so I can't be as free-spirited as you, but I think at a certain moment, we also need to, the last point I would like to make is you talk about talking, you mentioned the EU-ASEAN summit our leaders had 2 years ago. We as EU have been preaching, we've been asking since then to have a regular EU-ASEAN leaders meeting every year or whenever it is, every 2 years, whatever. We need to have a regular meeting. For the moment, we don't. It is important that our heads of state and government should meet regularly and discuss issues, not only dealing with trade but geopolitical issues. They need to meet, they need to get personal contact. That's how we will make our relationship, we will build the trust. If we just, again, kick the can saying, oh, we don't really want to have a regular meeting because whatever. That does not help the relationship. We would like to be part of the East Asian Summit. We are not yet. We would love to be part of the conversation because we don't pretend to be perfect, but we believe that if we want to achieve results together, we need to talk together. We need to talk regularly, structurally. This is how we want to do it. Sorry for it.
Dennis, you have something to add?
I don't know how to now deal with this debate. I think I'm sitting on the wrong side of the table because I would agree with a lot that Pak Cornelius just mentioned, although I would maybe tone down a little bit. But I mean, I don't want to just state everything that has already been said and already been countered. And I mean, this discussion is going along the traditional lines. I just want to say one thing. I never went to church in Europe, but I occasionally go to church in Indonesia because they have a bar in the church here, and always after service, everyone's gathering and drinking beer. So you're right. I think Europe could learn from Indonesia. Some innovations are really doing their intention.
Before moving to Pak Cornelius, Pak Yose, you have something to add? Okay. Pak Cornelius?
Don't worry, my writing is always provoking, but very shallow. Don't worry. Thank you.
If I can use my prerogative as a moderator, we've been talking about trade, free trade agreement, and some of the, the fact that probably democracy does not go hand in hand with good governance, with climate change agenda, and so on and so forth, especially with regards to the rise of sort of protectionism, nationalism, and to some extent, right-wing agenda. Just to compare, and since Pak Yose mentioned that probably EU has also has a need to diversify not only from China but also from Vietnam. But if we are going to take an important lessons and comparative lessons about Vietnam and Indonesia, because since Vietnam already has a free trade agreement with the EU, what did the Vietnamese do right that Indonesia has not been able when it comes to improving ties between, especially free trade between the two sides?
I wouldn't put it like that. I don't believe it's Indonesian do wrong and Vietnamese do right. We just had a trade negotiation with the Vietnamese. It's been, all the trade agreements that now we do in Europe, we call them the new generation agreements. It's not just about trade. It's a holistic thing. So we talk about governance, we talk about the environment, we talk about, a basket of things. And we just managed to, it has not been easy. No trade negotiation is easy. Usually takes 5 to 7 years. That's normal. I mean, I've never seen, maybe I don't know, but I've never seen a trade agreement made in 2 years. It takes time. And if it doesn't take time, I'm not sure it's a good signal. It means that maybe this is just a superficial agreement. So I think it's better to take time and do things well. It doesn't mean it's have to be drawn forever. And I think now it will be time to come to the end if we find an agreement that is fair for both. But I think that what we can see is that both the FTA with Vietnam and with Singapore have been extremely beneficial in the case especially of Vietnam. And we're convinced it will be the same for Indonesia. The negotiations with Indonesia have been frozen for other issues, I mean for climate change issue regulations, so that you cannot count the whole thing from the beginning because it's been frozen for a while. So the fact that the negotiation takes 7 years, there's nothing really abnormal. And really the hope is that, it just takes that time. And hopefully we can soon get to an agreement. We are now negotiating also as EU with Thailand. We are negotiating with the Philippines. We hope to negotiate soon again with Malaysia. And the Parliament, European Parliament, certainly is very much in favor of that. We believe that if we can manage to get an FTA with adding to Indonesia, to Vietnam and Singapore, if we can get an agreement with Indonesia, with Thailand, with the Philippines, and hopefully with Malaysia, we will have the building blocks to build a block-to-block trade agreement. This is still, this is a dream for the moment, but it won't be a dream if we manage to build the building blocks, and that's what we are doing. And we are doing it seriously, and because we are doing it seriously, it takes a bit more time. But we'll get there.
Just very brief, that Indonesia is not the only partners of EU having the negotiations at the moment. You also mentioned it. Thailand there, Malaysia, Philippines, and I believe Malaysia and Thailand especially started the negotiations before Indonesia. So this kind of difficulties actually show us something that it might be the European part can be a little bit demanding, too demanding perhaps, and difficult to get the terms from those countries or those economies. I don't know. Yeah.
So yeah, it's true we are demanding because, in most countries in the world, when they do a trade agreement, they do a trade agreement. And we used to do that in the past. Now we believe that in order to have the full benefit of a trade agreement, it must go beyond, it must be more comprehensive. That's why we have these chapters on governance, these chapters on climate change, sustainability, etc. So of course it's more difficult, but it's not only with this region. I mean, okay, we are now talking about Mercosur agreement. It's also been a while. Okay, but that is because our trade negotiations are more ambitious than many others, and that takes more time. But again, it takes more time than the result in the end. When we get to the result, and when we'll get to the result, we will have, it will be at the better advantage of Indonesia to have a strong agreement than just a limited trade agreement. It's a better thing for us all, but it takes a bit of patience.
Intervention from the floor, if there's any.
But I would say
sure.
one more thing. Sorry. No, I don't want to get into this discussion because we're running in circles because I've heard this 1,000 times already, these kind of arguments. But with regard to Vietnam, I think that's a very good question because everyone's, even also in Brussels, referring to Vietnam, and we made it Vietnam, we can make it the other one. It's a totally different game. First of all, I think the Vietnamese government has done a tremendous job with regard to economic policy in the last decades. So they've done a lot of things the right way, and that's trade agreements is part of the right way, but also with regard to human capital, with regard to infrastructure, with regard to developing the economy. So there has been, I'm highly critical of the economic policy of Indonesia for many reasons, also with regard to the trade policy, although I agree with Bayose with regard to who's more to blame on nothing happening. But anyway, so the second part is the Vietnamese economy is totally different to the Indonesian one. So I think there's no country in the world that is more dependent on international trade than Vietnam. So for them, signing a trade agreement with the EU is a no-brainer. They had to do it. And the third point is, at least when I was in Vietnam last time, I asked a lot of people, how did you do it? Why was it successful and why is it unsuccessful with regard to the other Southeast Asian countries? And they said, okay, it's a difference between signing an agreement and implementing it. So where they just signed it, they're now in the process of implementing. So I think the EU is in for some bad surprises probably in the next years to come with regard to the implementation. So I'm not sure whether this will be frictionless with regard to the implementation of the trade agreement. So I would say it's a different situation.
Thank you, Pak Dennis. Anyone from the floor? I saw Danes first and then Wafa. Dennis?
Check. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the speakers for their insights and knowledge regarding Indonesia and EU, especially regarding economics and trades. My name is Danes. I'm from Horizon Indonesia. I would like to ask, shifting the discussion a little bit from economics and social towards more geopolitics and strategy. We see that in the past couple of years, the European countries and the EU itself has published Indo-Pacific strategies. I believe France have one, UK has one as part of its Global Britain by the previous government. But in the present moment, we see that there's a lot of geopolitical change, especially notwithstanding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also the situation in the Middle East. I would like to ask to Mr. Antoine and also Dr. Dennis regarding their view. Especially after Donald Trump being elected, does the European Union ambition and its pivot to Indo-Pacific might take a back burner, at least during the Donald Trump presidencies? Or do you think that despite what Donald Trump re-elected back to the White House, the pivot to the Indo-Pacific is something that will not take a back burner and possibly the EU will also focus in the Indo-Pacific, added to their focus right now in the Eastern Europe? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Wafa?
So from just past researchers, my question is towards our European colleagues, Pak Dennis and Pak Antoine. So I think from our research in the past year, I think Indonesia is anticipating a potential polarization in supply chain, especially on EV. And one of the reasons is, of course, our major concern is US policies with regards, for example, to clauses like foreign entity of concern, right? Which a lot of us see as, just targeting certain countries. And of course, a lot of the world, especially those who are dependent to US market, like Korea, probably Japan as well, they will have to sort of follow that shift. And so countries like these, who are traditionally, of course, partners to Indonesia as well, they will have to watch out end-to-end their supply chain, from nickel to all the way to manufacturing, right? So Indonesia is anticipating a polarized supply chain where I think there's a term about the dragon supply chain and the eagle supply chain where they try to keep it clean so that they can still sell, right? But I'm looking forward to learning the European views on, say, China with regards to supply chain. Are there any nuances that Southeast Asian countries can expect that may differ, for example, Europe from a potential hawkish Trump policies towards China that Southeast Asian countries can look out for? Because that would be really good for countries like Indonesia, just looking for hopeful places that we can still have a more moderate views or I guess in doing this, like you said, you mentioned a more pragmatic policy. So is there any nuances that you can, I guess, give us for this? Thank you.
Thank you. We have two questions, one on geopolitics, one on geoeconomics, and both questions are for our European colleagues.
So on the first part, certainly the election of President Trump will oblige even more. It's nothing new really, but it will push us more into having a more rational, better use of our defense industry, coordinate better our efforts. Possibly, we have begun doing that, but possibly putting more budget on defense and security. I think this is something that we have known for the last years. It's always difficult when your budget, when there's a lot of debt that we have to deal with to find the compromises, to find the money to do it. But clearly, everybody agrees in Europe. I think that, I mean, with Trump or without Trump, but with Trump probably it will be even more obvious that we need to make this effort. And actually it's good. I mean, everybody agrees that Europe always progressed so far through crisis. And when we are obliged to do something, we do it. That's human nature. So I think that certainly we're going to have a defense commissioner. It's not the key of everything, but it's a step forward. So you will see in the next years that the shift in Europe is going to go towards more independence on defense, on defense and security, but also on the raw materials, on the economic supply chain. We need to find ways to be sovereign, more sovereign, less dependent. It's difficult, but it's good. That's what we need to do. So certainly we now begin the 10th legislature of the European Parliament. The two big changes probably that will, compared to the previous mandate, will be one, we will concentrate more on defense, on energy, and the raw materials issue, the economic independence or less dependence, or trying to manage the dependencies, will be at the core of what we will do. And the second aspect is to create the condition for growth. We cannot continue where we are. I mean, we just said Germany is almost in recession. Or the Commission, I think, published 2 days ago the forecast, and well, we are about an average around 2%, I think, growth. We need to do more, and we need to do better. So again, every time we have a crisis in Europe, this pushes our governments and our member states to do more together, because usually they realize when there is a crisis, they hope they could do without sharing resources, but when they see they need to, and we will be better off with a better coordination and better use of our money, then they get together, and they showed that very clearly during COVID. So we had a huge emergency during COVID. We managed to do things in a few months that we would never have done in many years. So some people say this new president in America maybe is a good thing for Europe because it will push for more integration, or certainly for more coordination, at least, on foreign affairs and on defense, and also on supply chain.
How about Ukraine?
Well, in Ukraine, our position is not changing. We are now celebrating, sadly, I mean, I should not say celebrate, but marking the anniversary of the 1,000 days. Now the new element in this crisis is that North Korean troops are on the ground, as proxy. This just reinforces our view that this is not only a regional problem. It is, of course, the first time since World War II that we have war on our soil or in our neighborhood. That's why we are very active, and we will also have to find more money and more resources to be, if the US, I hope not, diminishes effort. We need to compensate because we have no choice. We see this aggression as an act of, not respecting the rules-based order, not respecting the climate, the UN Pact, the UN Charter. We cannot accept that the member state just does not recognize the sovereignty of one neighbor and just invades it just because it can. We believe that the international community should not accept it, but certainly we are going to continue not to accept it, because we believe that the next generations, if we begin accepting that any given member state of the international community, just because it can, invades the neighbor and say, actually, it used to be mine before, this is the end of a world-based order. So we need to, and again, the fact that we now have North Korean troops on the ground just gives us more justification to that process.
Yeah, I take the supply chain question Maswafa. Yeah, actually, I mean, what we're already experiencing, especially the German companies that are very active in China, is a decoupling of supply chains. So you have the, as you said, the eagle supply chain that is very much dominated by catering to the American market, but also dominated by American, regulation, American sanctions and tariffs and so on. And then you have the dragon supply chain for China and for the Chinese market, which still is one of the biggest in the world, and for the German companies and for European companies still the biggest source of growth, although the relation is getting less successful, let's put it that way. So they are already building exclusive supply chains for these different markets. And I think for Southeast Asia, there's a huge opportunity in this, because Southeast Asia will be part of both supply chains. Of course, it has to be very cautious because of what we discussed earlier. The trade diversion, the Americans being very suspecting with regard to the way China goes into the region and tries to go around tariffs and sanctions and so on. But I think that the European companies will more and more look into the region in order to build their China supply chain with the help of companies of supply chains here in the region. So I think that's a huge opportunity. So basically you can say that this rivalry, US-China, I mean, this is not a new argument, there's a lot of opportunity for Southeast Asia in it, but of course it's also a lot of danger in it as well.
We are closing to the end of the session, but Pak Yose and Pak Cornelius, do you have some short comments to the questions of geopolitics and geoeconomics?
On Indo-Pacific, for ASEAN interest, ASEAN tends to pretend not to know that European countries want to come here, France, Germany, UK, because ASEAN has interest. The more foreign forces here, navies here against China, the better our condition, because we have no bargaining power against China at all. Just you watch them pretend not to know. All EU say, US say, Japan say, ASEAN is the center of Indo-Pacific. But India also should be the center of the Indo-Pacific, because Indian Ocean, it's not ASEAN Ocean. So I think, but in the Pacific geopolitical problems, it will develop, but there will be no war. China is not interested with war. They just want trade and money. But for Indonesia, please come to Malacca Strait, but don't tell us. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we don't have time to extend anymore, and thank you for attending these sessions. And I believe that I cannot conclude anything, but this is the impression that I get. And while we have very heated topics to discuss, sometimes debate, this is also to prove that two democracies can still talk to each other, not as sometimes the occasion that we are having when we are discussing with China, that sometimes some of the topics are lost in translation. And thank you again for our wonderful speakers. And thank you for the audience for attending this session. We shall now proceed to the next panel, which is the fourth panel. And please join me in a round of applause for our speakers and our discussion this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Andrew. Ladies and gentlemen, as Andrew has already said, we continue to the next session. We invite all speakers and moderator for the fourth session, Mr. Ardi Wardana, to the head table. Beforehand, we would like to welcome Professor Jisman Simajuntak, Chair of the Board of Directors, CSIS Foundation, who is joining us online through Zoom.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Pak Jisman. Can you repeat?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you.
I have a few slides and hope that you can run it from there.
Mr. Abdi, have you ready it? Okay. The floor is yours, Mr. Abdi.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is R.D. Wardana. I'm the economic researcher here at the center. Today, I'm gonna be the moderator for this panel 4, and the topic of protectionism versus free trade. Where are we heading after the super election year 2024? As we know that the rise of populist leaders around the world has a tendency to have a more protectionist government or protectionist state. According to the OECD, the world has been observed to become more protectionist. According to the IMF in 2022, trade restrictions surged by 14% compared to previous year, totaling over 2,600 measures in trade all over the world. As we know that in 2024, there are more than 50 countries that have their own elections, and most of them have several leaders that tend to be more populist than the previous leaders. Today, we're going to have a discussion about the protectionism and versus free trade with our distinguished fellows, as well as people and also experts in their sectors. We have Mr. Oliver Done. He is representing GTAI, or Germany Trade and Investment, and he was previously assigned to Brazil and Italy for the GTAI, and you hold a diploma in economics from the University of Tübingen. Please welcome Oliver Done. Another one, we have experts from the CSIS, Dr. Jisman Simanjuntak. He is the President Commissioner of PT Indoretail Makmur International, TBK, since 2015. Dr. Simanjuntak serves as the chairman of the Board of Management of Center for Strategic International Studies and rector of Universitas Prasetya Mulia. Please welcome Dr. Jisman Simanjuntak. We also have distinguished guest, Dr. Titik Anas. She is the founder of Suara Institute, previously known as Presisi Indonesia, an economic and business research-based consultancy firm. She earned her PhD in economic policy from the Australian National University in 2012, and she is currently a senior lecturer and researcher at the Department of Economics, Universitas Padjadjaran. Please welcome Dr. Titik Anas. As we all have our distinguished guests here, let's get started with this discussion and roundtable. Please welcome Mr. Oliver Done. You can start with your presentation first, please.
Yes, hello. Nice to be here. I'm new to Jakarta. It's my 3rd month. Very fascinating country. A lot of things to discover. So I work for Germany Trade and Invest. So let's wait a second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, next slide. Okay, yeah, I'm going to explain briefly who we are. We're obviously an institution of the German government. Then I'll talk a little bit about the repercussion of the US election economically, and then about the main topic of our workshop here, free trade and protectionism. Yes, next. Next, please. So that's us, my colleagues. I don't even know where I am, but that's our institution. We are the International Business Promotion Agency of the government. We are linked to the German Ministry of Economics and Climate Action. And our tasks, I will explain in the next slide, please. So yeah, this is our offices. We are about 50 countries and really small offices normally. I'm here with my colleague. We are two in Jakarta. Next slide, please. So, and this is our mission. What we do mainly here is to inform German companies about what is going on economically, where could maybe there could be business opportunities, no? And in cooperation with Indonesia, with Indonesian companies, but also really to participate in projects, sell products. Yes, and so this is the market intelligence part. We normally do that for companies who don't know so much about Indonesia, and so we in Germany, companies who don't already have no business relations yet with Indonesia, they don't know very little about Indonesia, and so we're trying to change that, give Indonesia more of the attention it deserves, so that the company can decide, okay, I want to take a closer look. And then with the help of the German-Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, find partners here. We also do, we're looking for foreign investors to bring them to Germany, show them Germany as the business location. And we do that individual consulting free of charge, and we approach them by ourselves, and we do that worldwide. Then we inform about the general business location in Germany, and we have special programs for regions in Germany that go through a structure change. No? So and the East Germany is still like not on the same level as in Western Germany. So we have special programs for that, and we support programs. We bring business delegations here to Indonesia and do that together with the German Chamber of Commerce. Yeah, next slide, please. So now about the US election. Yeah, so are we in a new era of easy recipes? Because Trump, he said, okay, tariffs are simple, trade wars are easy to win. And so for him, it's basically the idea of a deal. Either we raise tariffs, so either companies, they think it's too expensive to export to the US, and then they bring their production to the US. So he wins more jobs, more production in the USA, or they pay a lot and then he gets the money and can redistribute that. So that sounds really, sounds nice, yeah, but that's not the whole truth. What tariffs, next slide please. What tariffs actually do. So I put this puzzled this together myself. Sorry that our graphic designer didn't see this one. Don't tell him. So it has a lot of negative consequences, of course. Because just for some examples here, many companies in America, of course, they import inputs from other countries, from China, and they need that, you know, for production. You cannot disentangle that anymore, almost. So this becomes more expensive. So the production cost rises, and they pass it to the consumers. So we have inflation, the so-called imported inflation, and then at a certain point, the Federal Reserve has to raise the interest rates. That will gonna bring investment down, finally bring growth down, and have also consequences for the rest of the world. So financing will become more expensive in other countries. Capital flows in the US and not for productive reasons. And of course, the US will become less competitive in their own export, which brings growth. You know, that's one of the factors that brings economic growth. So the companies, when they're protected, they don't have such a big incentive to innovate more anymore. So in the end, it's the contrary to what Trump's promises happens, you know, in any way. And there's a retaliation of the trade partners who makes things worse, you know. So that makes it even more expensive. Okay. And we have 50 offices, and we did a little recap in the countries. What are the first reactions? So we have heard much already today. What were the first reactions? some of you are really even closer to the markets than I'm, but I'm just repeating here what my colleague said. So China will be harmed, but has been preparing itself. It's really known to be very flexible, and even, I mean, even if the tariffs really happen, that there's a 60% tariffs, like Trump said, they still hope, for deals. They're big enough, and it's for them. For Trump, it's a game. He doesn't hate China. He wants to really. He wants to find deals with them, and there could be deals. It's not automatic that China suffers in every respect. So, also considering that they hold the U.S. debt, they are financing the whole U.S. economy in the end, and they host many U.S. companies and. For example, Tesla and Trump's friend, Elon Musk. So let's see what happens there. But the projections say that, okay, they might lose 10% of their exports. So that's what some institutes say, and could focus on other markets. And it could be in the short term, like a flooding, for the other markets, maybe also Europe. And in Germany, okay, Germany will be affected, of course. We sell a lot of capital goods to the US. 10% of our export goes to the US. And now we have a little bit this political vacuum. We have to wait for the new government and see what direction the new government will choose. And we have also directly, we lose an export to the US, and we also indirectly by the export to China that went to the US. That's also quite a lot of the German exports. So, and then a big partner of the US is, of course, Mexico. Almost all of their exports go to the US. And originally it was an idea of the Americans to have that as an alternative to China, to better Mexico than China, they thought for a while. And others say it's all the same, we isolate ourselves. But they depend so much on Mexico that it's not that easy, We put 100% tariffs on a car from Mexico, but there's a lot of components that also go to the US-based manufacturers of cars. So there's no easy recipe either. But there will be tough revision of the trade agreement that they have with Canada and Mexico. But my colleague said there's worried, no panic. It's in German say with dogs who bark, they don't bite. So when later on we will see how tough the US is really gonna be. And in France, my colleague said that so every country has a different profile in the exports to the US, and maybe the French have suffered less in the direct exports, but indirectly, because when Germany suffers, the France suffers too, because we are their most important market. So when our economy is down, it's really bad news. I mean, for all of Europe, and they have a re-industrialization going on that they could be harmed by this movement of French companies maybe to the US. Next, please. And then some more countries. Korea, of course, there's a geopolitical security issue. They need the US, and they will have to pay a lot for that. That might be one outcome of the election. Trump last time called the Korea money-making machine, I think was it, and he wants a good part of that. Then to show that in Europe we have a very Antoine said there's a lot of many different positions in Europe. It's not really all aligned. So, for example, Hungary was praised Trump's victory, and he said it's really good. And although the reality is that their car industry is also then facing doubts what will happen with the e-mobility. Would they really put a lot of money in? It's an important production point in Europe and for the car industry. So ASEAN, we have heard a lot of that. I don't really have to repeat that. A lot will go through the transactional style and the chemistry between the leaders, and maybe there is some common ground. Maybe it is important right now in these times. But also, how closely will the US, look at, okay, like it's already now in the Inflation Reduction Act, no? So they look into where does the investment come from, not what country does it come from. So where's the money from? So that will probably be even more looked into. So in the United Kingdom, of course, they have, for them, the US is very important, but also they're trying to fix their relationship with the European Union now with the new trade agreement, so they don't want to risk that and do their own deal with the US. Okay, and we did that, we put that online just to show you that we are working, we publish all our information to the German companies and can be easily translated to. Yeah, and now, next please. So maybe we have to check again, global trade, free trade is not automatically good for everybody. I mean, if it was, we wouldn't be talking about it, we wouldn't be discussing it. There are downsides to it. So the basic idea, of course, is good. Everybody does what he does best, and then trades with the others, where everybody has like a different dispositions, and that could be a win-win situation. It's not always a deal where one wins and the other loses, so it can be beneficial to both partners, to all parties involved. But we're starting from different points. Countries and regions are at different moments and in their development. And to developing countries, they need some more time, like the US or Europe needed time when it was in earlier phases, so they were protected too, until you have the power to really to ask for that protection or to do that yourself. So you need some time, and also different countries have different rules. We know that Chinese, there's a lot of public government owned. Government money in private business, or it's not even private business. So, and what in other countries or in the World Trade Organization wasn't planned. So everybody plays with different tools. So that's a risk. And the original idea is that the capital flow goes there where it's most productive. But of course, there are, as we see, also speculative money, hard to control multinational corporations. So it's a long-term investment, and then we have sudden erratic policy changes that you cannot shift your investment all the time, depending on political decisions. A good thing about trade, of course, is a variety of products and services available, that you can have everything wherever you want. But on the other side, as we have seen, in multiple occasions, turbulences and disruptions, they go immediately global, and competition encourages innovation, but sometimes it goes too far, and we take too much advantage of the human and natural resources. And then last, what is good, it brings people together when they trade. And so that creates a common understanding, and then we can tackle together common global challenges, like global warming, and have less risk of wars. And then, but the risk is that, of course, the power diplomacy, that larger countries and with the huge military, they abuse their power, so that the power diplomacy don't play along according to the rules. So if you turn it around, what's good and bad about protection is almost the same, like mirrored, no? So it's good, it's comfy, to have low pressure. You have your own market, and there's no aggression from cheaper competitors, but you're also gonna have less incentives. As I said, there's inefficiencies coming chronic and not, and you don't have the technology progress and transfer. And then you have more political influence, which is a good news for the politicians. They have other, they also have other interest groups to please. You know, they have give to people jobs and so. But if it's more in the hand of politicians, there's also more risk of corruption. Environmental problems, so the taxpayer pays for companies, for private companies, which is also not, yeah. So, yeah, I'm almost done. So we have then the last, so this is the last slide. What has been tried, you know, to fix maybe all the shortcomings of this, or the risks of trade? Of course, the General Agreement Tariffs and Trade in the World Trade Organization, which very good ideas that the favorable conditions you have, give to one country, give to everybody, so it's like a positive spiral, no? So there's always less barriers to trade. But we've all seen that the power diplomacies, I noticed, destroyed the system a little bit, so the bigger countries, they will always have the last word in it. That was not the idea. And the dispute settlement, it doesn't really work. We have import substitution in countries like Brazil that created there like a really powerful car industry, which normally wouldn't have been there, and regional integration models with mixed results. Sometimes things get too complicated. Sometimes you don't have a real integration, so you're not really one powerful bloc to the outside. Yeah, then the deals, no, we have seen beginning, we will see more of that. So that's the tendencies that the bigger countries, they will make deals, and the smaller and developing countries will lose in this scenario. And the other free trade agreements are good, second best solution, but sometimes they become too comprehensive, as I said. No, that's the fashionable thing, comprehensive. But sometimes there's too much stuff in it, and so we lose sight of what we really want to lower, have an easier trade. So that's my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Done. That was very interesting. You laid out all the countries even, and also the plus and minus of the global trade and what has been done several decades ago until now. And yeah, we should move on to the next speaker, Pak Jisman. Are you there?
Yes, thank you.
All right, floor is yours.
Guten Tag, Pak Done. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Pak.
Okay.
Can hear you clearly.
I was saying Guten Tag to Pak Done. Guten Tag.
Guten Tag, Herr Professor.
I think Mr. Done has presented us very interesting numbers, and I'm going to complement this presentation with a different kind. I gave my slides the title Trade Armageddon to keep you awake, to keep participants of this seminar awake, but I really mean it. We are heading towards a very difficult period. And the reasons behind this will be the subject of my discussion. Slide 1, please. Next slide. Next slide. Let's not forget the last 30 years, we have been enjoying the dividends of openness, particularly after the Uruguay round. And after that, we experienced the rising connectivity in the supply chain and concentration of trade in mobility-related products and processes, electronics, energy, transportation equipment and related products, including strategic materials. And our trade has become much more complex through the deepening of division of labor, enabled by openness of the economies. It's really complex now. With a tendency towards greater and greater science intensity. And we remember how China entered the WTO in 2001. And after that, we are witnessing the phenomenal growth of US-China bilateral trade. China trade centered in electronics, and US trade still centered in petroleum and gas, but also in products related to electronics as part of the global supply chain. China and US combined has 24% share in world export in 2022 and 22% in import. And my worry is that these dividends from openness are going to diminish a great deal in the years to come. Next slide, please. We are witnessing this STI rivalry or warfare. Science, technology, and innovation rivalry, as reported in the OECD report from 2023. The issues involved is number one, securitization of trade, weaponization, how countries aim at technology sovereignty, which is, in my view, a contradiction in terms, and then strategic autonomy, completely a reversal of the spirit that we have been going through over the last 30 years, the spirit of openness. Now we are dealing with securitization of technology products, issues of sovereignty in respect of technology, and strategic autonomy. And for these countries, introduce protection, promotion, and projection measures to promote, to protect, and to project whatever STI advantages a country enjoys. And in addition to the technology rivalry itself, we are also faced with the imperative of doing something for net zero emission, biodiversity restoration and conservation, and inclusion-friendly or SME-friendly technology changes. These will need to be addressed simultaneously. And I think it was Acemoglu who once said that the very deep inequality facing us these days is to a great extent attributable to technology change. In every wave of new technologies, access is by definition unequal. And small and medium firms suffer from unequal access. Facing all these, countries, governments introduce STI-centered holistic industrial policy. holistic industrial policy. That name is really scary. It's a kind of centrally planned industrial policy covering everything, all the protection, promotion, and projection measures, and covering all kind of sectors, because we know from input-output tables that all sectors are related with one another, and also spatially, space. And in this rivalry, I would like us to think about the China quandary. If you read reports on STI rivalry, China is considered as a different category than the rest of the world. I think there is security consideration here, probably ideology, or this so-called competition between authoritarian system and market economies, but also, of course, economic rivalry. This reminds me of Japan's bashing in the 1980s, when Japan was declared number 2 in the world economy. My deep question is this, I have no answer to this. Is there anything wrong with a developed China? And I think we need to dwell on this. All of us need a kind of a good policy on China based on a good understanding. Next, please. Next. This is my worry. These STI initiatives may end up in STI implosion. If you restrict the flows of science and technologies, then externalities, positive externalities evaporate, depriving what is called increasing returns to scale and scope of the main drive. Externalities, positive externalities. We know this from new growth theory. And being located far in the upstream, holistic industrial policy or STI war harms the entire value chain. It's a totally different than tariff hike imposed on consumer goods at the lower end of the value chain. My worry is rather than resulting in sovereignty and autonomy, worsening STI rivalry will choke the search for new opportunities. Entrepreneurial drives will dry out in the economy. And we all remember the 1980s when we were told about effective rate of protection. The farther up in the upstream is a policy measures, the higher the impact on effective rate of protection. I think I still have one slide here. We live in a dangerous time, and I think election is going to reinforce ongoing erosion of openness, at least in the beginning. Maybe later politicians will come to their sense, but in the beginning they will try to pacify the voters. Politicians are overconfident that they know better than scientists do. Remember the denial of climate change. you can also argue about the denial of the negative impacts of trade protection. And we are seeing shift to the right politically and inward-oriented population. This is not confined to the US. We observe this also taking place in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And my deepest worry is that there is never a simple solution to a complex challenge. You all have to learn to live with complexity, including STI complexity, science, technology, and innovation complexity. And my suggestion is let's make the best use of some global arrangements, such as intra-East Asia arrangements, promote their dialogue also regarding STI cooperation in RCEP and FTAs that branch out from ASEAN, and I also to revive this Asia-Europe cooperation. We seem to have forgotten this lately, but I think there is a merit in doing this. Developing Asia, ganging up with Europe in search of a wise solution, policy solution to the quandary facing us these days. And also, of course, plurilateral arrangement that is applied to a particular sector because of the very strong impacts of that sector on world trade in particular, but also on the world economy in general. I have no good suggestion what to do other than trying to activate discussions, dialogues in the sub-multilateral arrangement. And I hope that my title is excessive, saying Armageddon. I still hope that politicians will come to their sense after a while. Thank you.
Super, Pak Jisman, for your presentation. Thank you very much. That was the last part. It was very interesting because you mentioned about the solution of using the sub-global arrangements such as the RCEP and Asia-Europe cooperation and plurilateral solutions. Thank you very much for your presentations. Let's move forward to our to the other speaker, Bu Tete Anas. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Very insightful and deep thought from Pak Jisman and Pak Oliver earlier. So it's a bit difficult for me to fill in the gap because there is no gap. So maybe my point of talks comprise of three things. First, probably going to give some evidence of what Oliver and Pak Jisman already talked about. The benefit of the open trade or free trade that we experienced so far. The second one, the glitch that we are having in the past few years and the way forward. So maybe we start from the first one. So I think we learned a lot from the Great Depression, and then we have that GATT and WTO establishment. And then after 30 years of WTO establishment, we know that we have export increased tremendously. Next slide, please. Next slide. And with the high growth, with this trade increase, a number of countries benefited from that. We see that convergence among the countries. Maybe you go to the next slide. So this is basically suggesting that merchandise export and services export increase tremendously. Next slide, please. And we have the correlation between participation in trade and GDP growth, which is positively correlated. of all the countries. And next slide, please. We have the trade that is being inclusive. That means that there is an income convergence across countries, positive correlated with the higher participation in trade. In the 30 years of the WTO. Next slide. And we also witness higher speed of poverty reduction among the WTO members. So open trade has been good so far. Next slide, please. But we have the glitch that Pak Jisman and Oliver worried about. We saw that tariff, yes, in general decreasing, apart from the last few years, where we see there, since 2018, there is an increase a bit about the import duties. And we see also on the right side, based on different types of product, we see there is an increase in tariff a little bit. Next slide, we have some measures harmful to trade being imposed, especially towards the COVID time and a few years after COVID, but we see it's declining this far last year, in the last 2 years. And top 5 countries with harmful measures include US, China, Brazil, Germany, and Canada. Most of the measures adopted is subsidies. So both tariff and harmful measures has been implemented in the past few years. This is what Pak Jisman worried about. The next one is we see that trade to GDP declining in the past few years. Yes, so this is alarming actually. Next. Maybe go to the next slide. Yeah. And this happened coincide with the Trump trade war in 2018, where he imposed a tariff on Chinese goods because of the accusation of unfair trade practice. And the trade war escalated in 2019, 2020, and then we have COVID. Yeah, not only trade war that we had, but also the COVID impact to the global value chain as we experienced, that resulted to the difficulty to get goods across. The trust that we built on the global value chain shattered. So many countries go nearshoring, reshoring, and friendshoring just to ensure that they get the supply from the trusted suppliers. And then we had a war in 2022. We are not yet recovered from COVID impact. Now we have war that affected the security of goods, especially food security, and also energy security. So we have triple negative impact in the past 5 years or so. Go to the next slide, please. So this is the effect of a Trump trade war between the China and the US, where we see that the export of China to US decreased in 2018, but then we see in the past 2 years it has been increased again. Next. And this is the share. We see that the growth of China export to the US decreased, but to the rest of the world increased slightly in the period 2018-2022. Of course, China has to find other market to get their goods across. Next slide, please. So the most affected by the US measures are China, Mexico, and Canada, because they are quite large partner of the US. But also the other countries in the left-hand side also going to be affected with any trade restriction going to be imposed by US. Next slide, please. These are the source of imports of the US. There includes China, also Vietnam, Japan, and Korea with the machinery and electronics on the red one, and the other also transportation and some other products. So many countries going to be affected by the US trade restriction later if it's going to be imposed to countries outside China. Next slide. This is the US merchandise export to China. We see the decline in 2018 and 2019, but then in the past 2 years we saw an increase again. Next, just the same. The export to China declined, but to the rest of the world increased in 2018-2020. Next slide. China's source of import more diversified than US. So we see that it's more spread out compared to US that we saw earlier, but US still the largest partner to the China. Next slide, please. This is just the elaboration of what China imported from which countries. Next slide, please. So the post-COVID, as I mentioned briefly earlier, disrupt global supply chain and pose a national security concern, especially post-Russia invasion to Ukraine. And adding to the picture is the Middle East crisis. And we experienced into 2022-2023 that food price skyrocketed, energy price skyrocketed, so that many countries are considering self-sufficiency in food because some countries try to hold on exports, no more export of food because they want to secure for domestic consumption. And so also, of course, this is going to be alert to many other countries who used to rely on foreign sources. Next slide, please. And we also see that during the the Biden administration are no different with the Trump administration. We saw that US imposed tariff on the EV and of course on the solar panel, also semiconductors. So that's what is Pak Jisman suggested as STI rivalry. I think this in this several sectors that we see, including the probably rare earth. Yeah. Next. And not only US, I think many other countries followed the trend of going to impose tariff on foreign goods. And we see that EU is planning to impose tariff on imported EV from China, although China's EV is very cheap and can make us faster reaching the net zero emission, right? Next slide, please. Now, post-2024. The worry is that Trump will levy 10 to 20% tariff on everything America imports and 60% on all goods from China and higher duty, perhaps 500 on cars from Mexico. This definitely will trigger retaliation from other countries that is going to be affected. But this import, as Olivier mentioned earlier, is no good to US either because it's going to drive inflation. We know that US is having difficulty to reduce their inflation. They keep the interest so high to keep the inflation. With inflation high and their budget constraint, the national budget constraint is having deficit of more than 6%, and the debt to GDP ratio is also high. I think putting import duty on imports is probably not a good outcome. It's not going to bring short-term outcome to the Trump 2.0 government in the short term. But probably in the long term, they will have their objective to get the production domestically. But can the American people wait for the long term and suffering with the high inflation in the short term? Probably that's the question. Of course, if Trump does what he said, all countries is going to improve their efficiency so they can still tap the market given the import duty. Go to the next slide, please. These are going to be affected by the Trump import duty later. These countries, I mean, next, including Indonesia, of course, there. So next slide, please. Yeah. So the interest of the rest of the world is to keep the global trade open, actually, because the experience we had with the open trade so far. But the necessary condition for open trade is peace, actually. So long if we don't have peace, many countries will think about geopolitical uncertainty. So they will occupy with the national security issues rather than making or achieving prosperity for their people. So I think if a multilateral institution that work on peacekeeping should more accelerated in their homework, so that we don't have geopolitical tension that we didn't experience before Ukraine war. That's when we had prosperity through trade. With the global uncertainty due to geopolitical tension, we're still going to have protection for the reason that countries want to ensure the national security. So always going to be national security will be the first and utmost objective of every country. But once peace is restored, I think there are two more homework that need to be done so that open trade can continue. One is the WTO reform, which has been stalled for many years. And this needs developing countries more active participation, because it is in the interest of developing countries to have open trade, actually, because the convergence that I mentioned, it's actually developing countries catch up with the developed countries because they can tap the larger market with open trade. And while WTO has its own complexity, because has large number of members, I think I agree with Pak Jisman that we have to we have to optimize the sub-global agreement arrangement that we have so far. For Indonesia, for example, it's a member of RCEP, and also so many others regional cooperation and agreements. And probably it's also going to be a good time for EU, Indonesia to continue and conclude. Because it's time to get, if you don't get that market, you can get your prosperity through other market. So maybe I end there. Thank you very much. And also another thing, in the open trade and free trade that we have so far, many countries forgot that that there are always free trade kill firms, inefficient firms, and make people lose jobs from that inefficient firms. So in many countries, the complementary policy doesn't exist that take care of these inefficient firms, whether they can move to other sectors easily, or whether the people that lost jobs because of the free trade can get another job easily. So if we lack of that complementary policy, we probably going to have a suboptimal outcome of the free trade. So I think that's my end. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Tetek Anas, for your presentation. It's a very interesting presentation for us. And now I open the Q&A session. Yeah, we have already one more. Let's start. Oh, three. All right. Start with, yeah, please.
Thank you. My name is Mahesa. I have a question to Mr. Oliver Don. Yeah. Hello again. So you mentioned as we know that Germany is one of the countries that very committed in to support funding in a green transition, including, for example, in JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership. But since now, as we discussed earlier, now we are entering the new dimension of unpredictability and uncertainty. So regarding to Trump's 2.0, so it can lead the change of trajectory of energy transition funding and investment. So in your point of view, how these recent developments will affect the, for example, the JETP scheme and also investment in green energy sector, and how to mitigate the risk. And also I have a question to Ibu Titik Anas. You mentioned about the importance of the economic cooperation, right? So meanwhile, as you said, we have a lot of existing free trade agreement, such as RCEP, or maybe IPEF, and many bilateral FTAs, and so on and so forth. So my question is, it is very simple. How is our resilience, Mr. Titi? How about the Indonesia resilience regarding to the upcoming wave of protectionism? So in short, how far our existing FTAs will affect and determine the economic resilience of Indonesia? Maybe to be more specific, for example, can our resilience give us possibility to achieve 8% economic growth, such as mandated in maybe RPJMN and RPJP, as we know, as stated by Mr. Prabowo. I thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mahesa. All right. Okay. Let's start with answering this first, and then we move on to the next question. First, from you, Mr. Mahesa. From Mr. Mahesa to Mr. Done.
Yeah, I wish I knew how the JETP goes on, no? Because the United States are one of the biggest partners, no, in that project. No? So we will see. And we, as not only as Germans but as Europeans, we absolutely stay committed, no, to a green transition. And maybe we have to do some convincing find new alliances, and find a new model, and even convince Trump that a green transition can also be business. You know, I don't know how we do that. You know, but it is a business in the end too. So I cannot really answer that. We have to wait. No, how that really plays out with Trump.
And how to mitigate this agreement is being, broken apart in the future.
Yeah, let's see if it really breaks apart, you know. I think there's a lot of discussions needed, you know. But if the US really say they're out of all this, then we have to forge new alliances, make a new Green Deal for the green transition in the world. No, because we are all in the same boat. That's yeah, it's urgent.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Doni. We may move on to question for Dr. Tirti.
Thank you very much, Pak Mahesa, for the questions. So if you refer to resilience as we can still grow 5%, I think it's more because our domestic market that is quite large and our export is still growing. But when the next US government do impose tariff on our export, of course we are going to be affected. And for the growth of 8%, I think we need more than just our current FTA. We need more investment. We need more export. And our current FTA is needs to be implemented as it was designed. Otherwise, we won't benefit from the FTA. So I think those three combinations that we need.
All right, thank you very much for the answer. We move on to the next question.
Okay, thank you for the presentations. I think very informative and very engaging. As we know that this kind of protectionisms that has been applied so far can be differentiated into several categories. For example, like during the Trump, the first periods of Trump's, we have seen how the brute force policy were actually implemented by Trump administration, such as tariff and also restriction to import of import and investments and many others. That kind of brute force policy. But during Biden era, the kind of protectionism shift towards the more subtle protectionism, such as industrial policy with the support of support given to the domestic producers or producers from friendly countries, and it's more like in the form of subsidy. So there are two kinds of protectionism that have been going on for the last last 8 years. And what do you think about the Trump's next administrations? Are they going to also impose or to continue this industrial policy plus the tariff that they also already have planned to do, or they just leave the industrial policy aside? And if this kind of industrial policy will be continuing, what type of industrial policy that we are going to see? Like for example, so most of the industrial policies implemented under Biden administration is related to the sustainable production, so sustainable and green products to enhance the U.S. competitiveness in those industries. But we know Trump is a bit reluctant when they're talking about the climate change as well as sustainable issues. So maybe we will see some kind of a shift in the industrial policy. And we know that industrial policy is not only benefiting the U.S. producers, but rather also benefiting many other producers in their friendly zone, like what Biden tried to do under IPEF, for example. Are they going to continue that kind of things, or they just do it by himself? By the U.S. only do it for the U.S. itself? And what about other countries' industrial policy, such as the EU industrial policy or Japanese industrial policy? Because they are triggered by Biden administration policy, so that EU as well as Japan and China also came up there with their own industrial policy. I don't know. It's up to anybody who would like to speculate on this kind of issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mas Joseph, for the question. Is there any of you wants to answer first? Oh, yeah, Pak Jesman, please. You're still muted, Pak.
Thank you.
Please.
You say if you can speculate about Trump, that would not be Trump anymore. But my reading of it is that he's going to push petroleum and gas mining using fracking, and then would deprive a lot of energies from the industries that happen to be the core industries of industrial policy, particularly EV, but also renewable energy solar panel. I think industrial policy like the Chip and Science Act of 2022 in the US and CHIPS Act in Europe from last year, 2023, and Made in China 2025 will need to be re-looked into if President Trump was steering United States back to fossil energy. The same applies, of course, the same impact would come from the possible withdrawal of United States from the Paris Agreement again. That much probably I can speculate, but it's going to change the picture a great deal by going back to fossil fuel in a big way.
All right. Is there any additional answers from the view? No? Okay. All right. Yeah, a bit hesitant, but yeah, we know. I mean, we have to wait and see until the administration has been set up in the future. But yeah, let's move on to the next question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your intros. I'm just curious about the fact that Indonesia is at the same time a candidate for the OECD, and is also now looking at becoming member of the BRICS. And I just would like to know from you, how you coincide these two wills, these two ambitions, and how does it play overall in this trade? Because the OECD is more the, global rules and, a bit like WTO in a way, but so it's a kind of a, and then the BRICS expressed a wish at least to be apart from this global system that is considered Western. So how do you coincide these two things, and how does it interplay with the trade perspectives? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the questions. Yes, please. No, Pak Jisman belum.
Titik
Just,
first.
do you wanna answer?
No, Titik first.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay,
want to
Pak.
listen to
All
Titik.
right. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Pak.
Pak. So, the time frame is different. We indicate our intention to access OECD is last term, right? Last government, and the BRICS is just recently. But the preparation to accession to OECD has been laid, and basically Indonesia's government is in the process of meeting all the requirements, yeah, all the reforms that is needed. So it's on the way. Our new government has explicitly said that one enemy is too many, 1,000 friends are too little, yeah, too few. So basically, what I learned from the news is that joining BRICS is just part of that intention. So I think like his visit to China and visit US is just in the same tone, I guess. But I think my colleague from IR and politics better answer the questions.
But yeah, but how does these accessions come to the interplay between the trade and also the cooperation? Do you have a say about that?
Well, I think OECD has a very good standard that can followed by Indonesia. I think we as economists always think that Indonesia should anchor their policy to good global practice. By anchoring our policy to global good practice, it means that we are not easily backtracking. While if we do it unilaterally, it's going to be easy for us to backtrack whenever we want. So I think that's one benefit of accessing to OECD, both for trade and investment regulation. Pak Jisman has something more to add.
Please, Pak Jusman.
Yeah, the agenda of the two is different. OECD focus is rules, compliance, adoption and compliance, and BRICS, I think, is more towards addressing common interest in economic development, less specific, more general in terms. So my feeling is that Indonesia will go both ways, but I think the much more serious work will be done in the context of OECD. I welcome these initiatives towards bringing Indonesia into the club, though of course it's still a long distance to go. But Indonesia has exercised this for a long time now. I remember going to Paris to the OECD, discussing good corporate governance, and that's also part of the attempts of Indonesia to bring corporation in Indonesia to the umbrella of good governance. I welcome these initiatives on OECD, but of course, it may cost not much to also go the BRICS way.
All right, Pak Jusman, thank you very much for the answer. We still have 15 minutes, so I'm about to open 3 more questions after this. Is there anyone who wants to have a say, ask, or give any thesis or hypothesis or maybe synthesis from this discussion?
may I to Titik and
Oh,
Pak
sure.
Dene? Pak
Sure,
Dene
yeah, yeah.
also.
This is a roundtable, so
Yeah,
please,
yeah. If
it's
there
open.
is no question from the floor,
Sure.
do you not see some parallels with the pre-Great Depression years? If tariff is raised to 60% against China and 20% against the rest of the world, I think we are going to the same or similar trade war. I cannot imagine that others would do nothing if they are confronted with a tariff hike of that magnitude. Would you comment on this?
Thank you, Pak. So my readings and my worry is that way. I mean, we have experience. I mean, we read from the literature that the tariff disaster of the 1930s, because of the U.S. again.
The Smoot-Hawley Act. The Smoot-Hawley Act.
Exactly. Have attracted retaliation from other countries, and that make the Great Depression more severe, right, Pak? We don't want to happen. We don't want it to happen. I think the history. I mean, we should read what happened in the Great Depression. So we are not going to repeat it again. So my thinking was that can EU be the savior of this rule-based system that we have so far? Because EU is very rule-based system, and you have a very high standard of everything, be it digital, be it protection to individual data, be it forestry, be it environment. So you know in front of you that we are having a collapsing world trade system. So I think we are looking at the EU, but also we can look at ASEAN as an institution that can also bring out the interests of the developing countries, because as we seen from the data, the developing countries that is benefiting from the trade. Of course, every country benefiting in its own way, right? But it's clearly the convergence that we see showing that developing countries catching up because of the open trade. So we don't want to go back to that smooth trade act, ya Pak. So I think that's my take on that, Pak Jisman. Thank you.
Yes. Let's try to activate this Asia-Europe Forum.
All right. Okay. I'll go back to the next question. We still have 10 minutes now. So if you ever have any question or thoughts, probably we can have more deep discussions or probably technical discussion as well.
Can I ask a colleague from Europe?
Sure.
Yeah. So EU is following the steps of US to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, right? What is the reason behind that? Is it because you think it's unfair competition from China? Because we know that China often put subsidies in their production that make our domestic companies has to compete harder with the Chinese good, or what is the reason behind that move towards more protectionist towards the Chinese goods?
You know better than me, but my take is that we do it because we believe our competition services, the Commission believe that there is distortion of competition, and we just want a fair level level playing field. So I believe this is my interpretation of how, I mean, this is what we do with any country in the world that we believe, or any company, we believe is not playing according to the rules that globally we have agreed upon. And so I don't believe it's a reaction to the US, even if, of course, as you said, everything is, there are repercussions, but I think that originally the reason why was only that we believe that there is no level playing field and it should be reintroduced.
All right.
May I pursue a little on that?
Yeah, sure, Jusman.
How big is the part of EU's import from China actually originate in EU companies investing in China? Is there any statistics on that?
Well, I think I read that, Pak Jisman, that for example, the automotive, the EV that is exported from China to the US is actually the Germany's company, right? Yeah, Pak. Yeah.
But also probably import to Europe also.
Okay, Pak Jusman, thank you very much. Okay, if there is no other comments and questions, as a moderator, I would love to close this panel with pleasant. This is a very interesting discussions with 3 of our speakers and with all of you as the participants of the roundtables. We have a lot of insights, but I couldn't really convey all the insights. But one of the most important thing is we need more cooperations between countries and also between intercontinentally, because cooperations creates more opportunities to combat the challenges in our democracies right now. That's one of the many key takeaways that I could say. Thank you very much for all the speakers and all the participants for these sessions. I hope to see you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Babdi, for your excellent moderation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have come at the end of our dialogue, but before that, I would like to welcome our co-organizers on behalf of Dr. Dennis Suwasana and Dr. Safia Muhibat to the head table to deliver closing remarks from both of you. Okay. Now, without further ado, I would like to please kindly invite Dr. Suwasana to...
There's an Indonesian-European dispute who's going to start. And in order not to steal your points, I start and don't mention anything. I think after 8 hours of very intense discussions on a huge variety of topics, I think I don't have to add anything substantial. I just want to thank Bayose, Ibu Fifi, the whole team at CSIS, especially Mas Wafa. Is he in the room? Where is he? Sorry. You see, after 8 hours, I can't even see you anymore. So thank you so much for again, this great cooperation, not just today, but also in the last 8 years. And of course, Professor Jisman, thank you very much for being here with us in this room, although virtually. And you are the chairman of CSIS, so basically I also have to thank you for this great cooperation. But also I want to thank Professor Jisman, as I always do, for decades of cooperation with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, because for those of you who don't know, Professor Jisman is a former scholarship holder of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Germany.
Yeah, thank you.
So, very long-standing friend and partner of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So I want to thank all of the speakers and moderators and, of course, all of the participants. And I think this has once again been a very successful German-Indonesian strategic dialogue. We've posed many questions, Terence. Well, some answers maybe, but there's still, I think, a lot of things to reflect on. Has been a lot of inspirational debate, and I think we have enough, still enough to debate for the next 8 German-Indonesian strategic dialogues ahead of us. So thank you very much, and see you again soon.
Sure. I think a very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very last session of today's event. We've discussed so much today about uncertainty. So at least for us in CSIS, we're glad to have at least one certainty about the future of our cooperation with Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So hopefully this will not be part of the uncertainty that we are facing in the times in the future. Again, we are happy that another of our annual event is successfully completed. It's been both an honor and pleasure for CSIS to be cooperating with Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for the last 8 years for this series of events, but even years before that for other activities as well. So we always treasure our cooperation, and for that, I'd like to thank, of course, Pak Dennis for allowing this to continue on for now and hopefully for the future, and of course to all the team at KAS Indonesia, Pak Ari, of course, a long-standing friend of CSIS. Thank you so much for your cooperation. And I think listening to all the discussions that we had today, it seems that we do have a lot of homework facing the various issues developing now with the new governments in a lot of different countries. For us in Indonesia, the uncertainties and surprises have been quite abundant only in the past 1 month. So it's a very interesting time to come, and I do think that discussions like this is at least one of the ways that we are trying to make predictions, to make assessment, and even try to speculate once, here and there, to try to get us to, navigate some of this interesting times ahead. And so I treasure these kinds of events, these kinds of activities, and hopefully look forward to have more in the future. So thank you. And of course, to CSI staff, Wafa, Farhan, Hana, and I think a lot of the others, those operating the IT, Mas Uchan, Mas Yudi, thank you so much for helping us make everything a success. So I look forward to our next event next year. I think Wafa and Mas Ari will start working on interesting topics because we do have a list of very interesting ones that have not been discussed today. I do think so. You don't look so
Share the list, please.
You don't look so confused. Okay, so thank you, and hopefully see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis and Dr. Fifi. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally come to the end of our dialogue. On behalf of CSIS and KAS, I would like to thank all the speakers for their insightful presentations and engaging discussions. Likewise, we would like to convey our deepest gratitude and appreciation towards attending participants, both virtually and in person. We hope to see you all again soon, and for those leaving Jakarta, we wish you safe travels back home. Good afternoon, and see you in our next events.